Well, good afternoon. Welcome along to the SIGA-Soccerex forum, focusing on sports sponsorship and how it's been affected by and will react to the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Ben Jacobs, and I'll be moderating our 6-strong panel. We'll dive straight in, and we will be focusing on the impact of the past 3 months or so on sponsors in sport, and also discuss how a sponsor can champion integrity. We do want this to be as interactive as possible, so please get in touch with your questions as well using the YouTube chat, and we'll weave them throughout the course of the panel. The discussion will last just under 90 minutes, and sadly, unlike football, there will be no drink breaks. We're just going to power straight through. So let's introduce our panel and get the opening remarks. First up, it's a very good afternoon to Salam Shawa at Qatar Airways. Salam, we of course all know that airlines have struggled during this COVID-19 period due to the travel restrictions. How has COVID-19 affected Qatar Airways and your sports portfolio?
Thank you very much for arranging this, and good afternoon, everyone. Of course, as you know, COVID-19 has impacted the entire airline industry, not only Qatar Airways, with IATA predicting losses across the industry about 84 billion US dollars. So you can imagine. However, we were the only airline in the world that we continued to fly, and we wanted to take people home safely and reliably. It was our responsibility. We had never stopped flying, and that had enabled us to really be the first in bringing some safety measures and how to give the assurance to our passengers to travel and that they can rely on us. So we have operated over 16,000 flights, commercial flights and chartered flights, and we have carried almost 2 million passengers to their home during the pandemic. And we had just become more resilient, more stronger. How do we adapt our schedule? How do we adapt our flights to accommodate for all those passengers who are stranded somewhere and they need to get home? So it was a tremendous effort, a tremendous experience. While everything has slowed down, we continued to play our role as a global carrier with the responsibility of flying people, taking them to be with their beloved ones and their families and unite them together again.
But also the world's capital across centuries.
But from a sports perspective, let me tell you, this is from an airline perspective. From a sports perspective, we had worked very closely with all our sport partners during those difficult times, creating content, because we all have, similar audience with our fans and followers and our passengers. So we had actually become closer to the clubs, and we have created a very solid content and the strong messages which was related to the COVID-19. So how to encourage people to stay home, what to do while they are locked down, how to manage their time. And we have made use of all our players, our sponsors, the clubs. They were extremely supportive, and we had launched a lot of initiatives with the clubs that was a huge success. And I think it was very close to the heart of the people that we really understood what was the requirement. So for example, just to give you an example, with AS Roma, we have took off the branding of Qatar Airways on the jersey. As you know, we're a titled jersey to support an initiative for the club that is called SME in Italian, which means together. So, and that had helped to raise funds, almost 100,000 euros for the COVID-19. We have made use of the players to provide content and give messages to the whole world how to stay safe. We've used Neymar, our ambassador, in creating such a very warm videos, what to do during the lockdown and during quarantine time while we're all locked at home. With Bayern Munich, we did something similar. So we have created a lot of content with the clubs just to make sure that we're very close to our fans and followers, and to remain very solid and make use of the sponsorship at difficult times.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say that we can watch one of the videos from AS Roma, which you referenced in your answer. And this will give us a bit of an insight into how content and sponsorship and that relationship between a club like Roma and Qatar Airways has changed during COVID-19. So let's just kick off by taking a look at that video between Qatar Airways and AS Roma.
Thank you.
Rome, the world's capital across centuries. And every guest uncovers the ancient secret that all roads do in fact lead to it. Let us take you to Rome and all of Italy's iconic cities that you miss as much as the stars of its famous club miss their city.
I love a lot of things in Rome. I love the city and the Spanish Steps. In that area, I like to be.
It's not easy to choose, but I think for most of the people it will be Colosseum who is the thing to see.
Qatar always connects fans to the countries and to the football, and therefore I would like to thank them because they are doing an amazing job. Enjoy Qatar Airways.
With Qatar Airways, all roads lead to Rome.
Great stuff. Well, about that video as we continue our discussion on individual clubs or activations that various sponsors have done. But Salam, thank you very much for now. And I know we'll see another video from Qatar Airways during the course of the next 90 minutes or so. Let's bring in Michael, though, the Senior VP of Global Sponsorship at MasterCard. Michael, how have things changed during COVID-19 from your perspective? Have you had to restructure sponsorship deals, or are you simply going to existing investments that you've made and asking for some kind of rebate back? Surely the dynamic between yourself as a sponsor and those you've invested in has changed.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. Yeah, it definitely has changed, of course. Events have been either canceled or postponed. I think for those lawyers out there that understand there's a big difference between being canceled and postponed and when the event will actually happen. So from a financial point of view, we've been, very fortunate. We have great partners. We have partners that understand the situation. We have, contracts. Those of us that have all been through the contracting phase, we probably say the phrase, contracts are written for things that aren't necessarily good things, but you have to have them. You have to have an understanding going in what is going to happen in the event, something negative does happen. And obviously we're in one of those situations. So I would say for the most part, all of our partners have been fantastic to work with. They're understanding and they're, trying to do the best they can. Sometimes it's not even their choice, right? There's just the governments are stepping in and saying, you will or won't do this. You've got situations, obviously, with fans getting together, which is a huge, huge issue. So I'm sure throughout the rest of this, we'll talk about the whole notion of events without fans. But I would say, from a financial point of view, we've had to, clearly rework things. I would say for the most part, it's a deferment. It's not so much, not a lot of money changing hands per se, but it's a lot of deferment and partnering and thinking down the road a little bit further.
Great stuff. Thank you for now. Like you say, we'll delve in more detail into some of the points that have been raised by our opening two panelists. If you've got any questions as well, we're going to try and weave them in throughout. So please do get in touch on YouTube. We want this to be as interactive as possible. Let's say a very good afternoon, though, to Andy Westlake now, the chairman of the European Sponsorship Association. Andy, European sport has arguably been hit the hardest during this pandemic. What advice have you been giving to sponsors to get through these tough times?
Blimey, I mean, yeah, you're right. It's been an incredibly tough time, and the market, without question, has been hit. We know one of our members, Two Circles, have said that 47% of sporting events in 2019 will be cancelled or postponed. So that has a really significant impact, clearly, on the sports marketing sponsorship industry. And we've heard already from two very established brands about their top line approach to their relationships with sport. But look, I think that these crazy times that we've lived through they've presented challenges to every single organization in the world of sport and sports marketing, but you're right. I think there are some opportunities that have come forth. I think it gives brands an opportunity to, or organizations in sport, an opportunity to reflect on where they go next, what kind of organizational structures they need to put in place to ensure they're fit for the future. I think it's given organizations an opportunity to really focus on emerging technologies, on digital, on data, on social, on being a really authentic and credible part of the conversation in the world of digital and social media. And it's given some rights holders, I think, in the world a real opportunity to put forward some of their innovations much, much faster than they maybe would have done otherwise. So, you know, you see organizations like Formula One really, really fast tracking the stuff they've done around their esport proposition. And while it certainly wouldn't have delivered the kind of value to the sponsor community that live races would have done, I think certainly that's given them an opportunity to continue the dynamic, continue the dialogue with their sponsors. But look, my advice to brands, you know, who am I to give any advice to give advice to brands who have so many different objectives walking into sponsorship in the first place? But I would say, to Michael's point, continue to work on the relationship. Sponsorships that last and have value for the long term are built off brilliant relationships. I'd say don't go silent, because the fans are still out there. The fans are still hungry. The fans still want to hear about their passions. They still want to be engaged and involved in the things that they love. I mean, amazingly, the first week back for La Liga, they saw their viewership increase by 72% in Asia. I was listening to a podcast with John Brody from WWE yesterday that said their April year-on-year audience was up 100% on the WWE network. So, you know, people are super hungry for content. I'd say continue to drive digital and social hard, because digital and social is going to be the underpinning of value going forward, because I think we all know how important first-party data will be. And take time to develop activations for a very busy year in 2021. And I think at the moment, a lot of it is about underpinning those activation ideas with the purpose behind the brand. Funnily, we had a webinar with the European Sponsorship Association last week, where we had Vanessa from Rakuten talking about their relationship with FC Barcelona. And she was talking about a lot of the work they were doing was now embedded in this idea of optimism, which is what the Rakuten brand all stands for. So, you know, try and leverage your sports relationships to say something really authentic about the heart of your brand. And most importantly, looking forward, what do we think are going to be the trends that are emerging? From our research, it suggests that sustainability, community, brand purpose are going to be super important. And so begin to think about some of those things that are coming at us around the corner and build plans for those now, I would say. So yeah, look, it's a complex market, but it's there are certainly positives to be taken from it, I think.
Andy, thank you very much for now. Let's get a North American perspective. We've got Dan Mannix, the CEO of CSM North America. Dan, good morning to you. Good afternoon to us. CSM, of course, focus on some of the aspects that were just mentioned by Andy, like brand building, live events, working with rights holders. But when the rights holders and the live events disappear, how can you ensure that a brand moves forwards instead of backwards?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's good to be here. I think it really depends on which angle you're looking at it from, where the perspective, whether you're the brand, the property, the media company, or we do a lot of work with nonprofits in the social impact space. So there's been disruption for everyone. You know, some businesses, some brands are healthier through this. Everybody had that period where they were recalibrating with their own business and then looking at their sponsorships in a constantly moving landscape. So there's been trying to be everything tied to creativity and flexible solutions and scenario planning. Because as we see even what's happening now, some of the trends of the highest ratings ever, like even and in women's sports opportunities, the NWSL just had their highest ratings ever. We're seeing things come together quicker than ever, sometimes because of disruption. Like, for example, in English Premier League, we were just involved with a kit deal that took about 2 weeks to happen, which would normally take months. So I think there's brands that are looking at it from the long term while trying to be strategic in the short term. I think ultimately, and this speaks to values and integrity, it's the brands that have the leadership that were already leaning into what their brands are about social impact and the purpose of brands is only going to accelerate and come out in sponsorships. And I think with the events being canceled and changed, the acceleration to content creation and the flexibility to create content in different forms is accelerated in such a way that probably would have taken years. So everybody's trying to become content creators. I don't think it has to be perfect necessarily now. So the flexibility of putting content out in different ways, and then continuing to be able to pivot, because we're going to see what happens with the North America, with the sports leagues coming back. And we've already seen both challenges, like PGA coming back with some events, and then opportunities. Some additional players got COVID, and now there's a new partnership announced with Whoop, which is the fitness band that can do some tracking that every player's gotten. So with the challenges will come new opportunities. And I think the brands and properties that show up with the authentic voices will be the ones that will sustain the best throughout it.
Great stuff. Thank you for now. Those NWSL ratings are certainly impressive in North America. They actually surpass the ratings for the opening Premier League match when that returned behind closed doors. And also you'll see various short-term sponsorship activations, like Budweiser organised a Google Hang Meet with the commissioner of the NWSL. So interesting to see how that goes over the course of the coming weeks. Of course, though, we aren't just focusing on the impact of COVID-19 on sponsors. We will also spend some time discussing the role of a sponsor in promoting integrity. Delighted, therefore, to bring in Emanuel here, SIGA's CEO. I can tell you that off air, he was actually wearing a sombrero. So I'm hoping that at some point we'll see that during the course of this panel. But let's start, Emanuel, on a serious note. You, of course, are one of the brains behind SIGA's independent rating and verification system. What exactly is the system, and how can sponsors benefit from it?
Thank you, Ben, and I'm delighted to be with all these friends and leaders on sport integrity and also in global business. No doubt that we are at a defining moment. If there was already a crisis in health, a crisis in economy, a crisis in confidence, that is also a deeper crisis in the field of integrity in sport. And the way organizations and the way leaders from the different sectors have chosen to react to this crisis will dictate the future of sport and the future of the wider industry. Up until now, we have seen the traumatic impact of big, shocking revelations that have exposed years and years of systemic corruption, money laundering, tax evasion, and many wrongdoings, which tarnished the reputation of sport and dragged its positive values and good name through the mud. We have seen how the reaction, and a reaction that was pretty much led by the sponsors, instigated change at the helm of sporting organizations. That was the fuel. And it is because we value values, we value sport, we understand its social and economic function and impact, and we equally understand that sponsors have not only the legitimacy to fight to preserve the integrity and reputation associated with the massive investments that they fuel into sport, but also to build a future where sport is guided and operates under the highest standards. This was what mobilizes the industry to support and to back and to instigate SIGA to do what we are doing. This collective initiative, this global community where sponsors are also one of the key stakeholders. We have designed the most robust, adjusted, adapted standards to the reality of sport. And now we are in a defining moment where we will kick off in 2020 with the SIGA independent rating and verification system. And I think it's public that UEFA will be one of the leading organizations that will pioneer the implementation of the system. This is not small, and it speaks volumes about the leadership in UEFA and the ambition to continue to enhance the way football, in this case, is governed, is operated with the highest accountability standards. But only because we have the backing of the global business community. And I would like to take my hat off to MasterCard, to Qatar Airways, to the European Sponsorship Association, to agencies like CSM, and leaders behind this organization, because they have been the true game changers. in difficult times. With or without COVID-19, 2020 is the year that we will have finally an independent, neutral, objective, rigorous, independent assessment on where sports organizations are in contrast with the SIGA Universal Standard. That is truly revolutionary, that is truly game changer, and that is a silver bullet that every sponsor, big, medium, small, have been waiting so that they can ensure that they can sleep at night, knowing that the money that they invested in sport organizations is in safe hands and they will not be tainted by the adverse, brutal impact of a first page announcing a series of scandals, as we have seen in the past. So I would like to say this with a positive tone and with a very constructive message, because things cannot remain as in the old normal, where we would proclaim, where we would express wishful thinking without action. And action is what commits the organizations that are participating in this panel to progress, to instigate meaningful cultural change. We will reveal during the Sport Integrity Week, which will be held between the 7th and the 11th, the group of sports organizations that will go through this independent rating and verification system, SIRS, in addition to a number of other announcements that we will be making soon. But I think you understand, Ben, and as the media understands, that this is a unique moment in history, not only because we are confronted with an unprecedented global health crisis and the worst economic recession since the Second World War, but because we need to have a different cultural stance. And if there is a lesson that we can learn from spontaneous movements like Black Lives Matter, is that actions speak louder than words. And the same way that a number of technological and civilizational developments have occurred because people took a stance and gave a step forward, we now have the opportunity, we now have the leadership, we now have the muscle to instigate long overdue reforms. And that can only be done with the sport movement, not against the sport movement. This is why I would like to appeal to all sports organizations to join us, to join the movement, and to live up to the expectations of the fans, of the sponsors, and even of the broadcasters, even if the broadcasters have been somewhat passive along the line. So that is what led us to initiate a public tender, an international public tender process, and entrust BSI with the independent operation of the whole system, so that we can also lead by example.
Emanuel, thank you very much indeed for that explanation. And you also referenced BSI as the delivery partner for the system. And we are joined as well on the panel. Our sixth, last but not least, member of this discussion is Courtney Foster, Risk and Resilience Programme Architect for BSI. Courtney, we've had a kind of overview of the system, and as I understand it, it is in pilot mode at the moment. Can you give us a bit of insight into how specifically the ratings will work and who, including sponsors, will be able to access them?
Yeah, thank you, Ben, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Again, it's Courtney Foster, and I work as a part of BSI, British Standards Institution. Just a quick introduction to the business. BSI is the national standards body for the UK government. We are also a global audit and certification business that helps assess business integrity, business governance. So this fits right in with our wheelhouse, hence the partnership established between SIGA and BSI about 18 months ago. And as you said, Ben, the SIRS rating system is very much the brainchild of Emanuel, and the sports organizations really have an opportunity now to be the pioneers in undergoing this pilot program. So I wanted to just first tell a little bit about the journey we've been on to get us to a point to be able to launch the SERVS rating system. We have undergone a quite extensive review of the 3 standards underneath the SERVS system, which is good governance standard, financial integrity standard, and sports betting integrity standard. So we had our national standards body experts review the SIGA standards, ensure that they had a layered base system. So there's bronze level you can achieve, silver level you can achieve, as well as gold level that you can achieve. And those ratings are actually interdependent. So it grows with you as a sports organization as you mature in your governance and integrity systems. So what we have decided is essentially rolled out those 3 standards, did a complete review to make sure that they are accessible and auditable by our auditors once we go live with this program. That process took some time to make sure those standards were robust enough to undergo a third-party independent validation by BSI. And we're now at this stage where we've reviewed the standards, made edits to the standards, and we have created the rating system. And that rating system is very much in line with the bronze, silver, gold tiers that you're able to achieve. The 3 standards, you're able to undergo an assessment for good governance, then financial integrity, and then sports betting. So you are able to take it in a journey-based environment and undergo each rating or each standard assessment individually, but it will form part of a collective rating. So you may be able to achieve bronze in good governance, silver in financial integrity, and gold in sports betting, for example. So that does break down the standards rating system. We've created this through the expertise we have within BSI that creates assessment schemes. And so now we're at the stage where we're ready to pilot. And what we would like to do is engage some of the more pioneering sports organizations that are proud of their good governance, proud of their integrity, and proud of their financial systems that they have in place to actually undergo the first pilot for SERVS.
Great stuff. Thank you for that overview, and to all of our panelists for your introductions. Really interesting to hear your thoughts on a variety of different topics. And now we'll start to integrate some of your questions. If you're listening, you can put them on the YouTube chat, but we'll delve into individual topics in a bit more detail. So I want to come back to COVID-19, and hopefully some of the panel can play off each other's answers now, and we can have a bit of a debate. But I'm going to start with a big question to you, Salam, not only because it was on my list to ask you, but a variety of people have already put this question on YouTube as well. In light of COVID-19, what's going to be the impact of arguably your biggest sports sponsorship deal, which is Qatar Airways investment into Qatar 2022? Is your relationship with the World Cup on home soil, if you like, affected in any way by the pandemic?
I mean, we are very proud to host the Qatar 2020 World Cup in Doha, and I promise you, it is going to be the best World Cup ever seen. So we definitely are committed, and even though with the COVID-19, we're still working very hard and we're making our plans. And I always say my motto in life, if you don't have a plan, you're planning to fail. So we already have our plans in order, and we're definitely working very closely with all the authorities in Qatar to host. This is part of our role as an airline to host the FIFA World Cup. So definitely, I mean, we still have a long way to go, and we're working very hard, and we have already started. And last December, we've hosted the World Cup, which was, just a trial, and it was amazing. Everything went very well. And as I told you, COVID-19 was a very difficult time to test how would we react, and our react during such a difficult time that we worked very closely with all our clubs, our partners like Bayern Munich, AS Roma, Paris Saint-Germain. We came up with new initiatives. We've introduced something like live session on Instagram, where we hosted a pilot and a player. We had a very robust mechanism where we actually have switched our commercial branding into something related to the COVID-19, because a good good and solid brand would always understand the emotional need of the fans as followers and be with them, understand what they are thinking. So in no time, like Bayern Munich, when they went to play, we had to switch all our commercial branding that we're flying you home. The solidarity program that we were very proud of during the crisis. As I told you earlier, we helped repatriate close to 2 million people since mid of February, taking them home. And that was really globally recognized. We've also helped in solidarity by flying medical supplies and equipment, almost 200,000 tons. And if you ask me how much that would be, it's equal to 2,000 Boeing 777 freighters. We continue in solidarity with all our partnerships. So we did not pull off the plug. On the contrary, we worked around it to find out ways, how do we communicate, we become closer. We gave up the branding on AS Roma to help fundraising. And we've done in solidarity for the frontline health worker, we have given 100,000 tickets, return tickets to the health workers because we believe in the role in COVID-19. And of course, also as an airline, our staff had a solidarity program where they also had chipped in and we had a salary cut. So all of this solidarity at all fronts, whether to the health workers, to the clubs, to the staff, to the partners. And I think that all would make us very confident that even though it was a difficult time, but life has to go back to normal. And obviously our efforts will continue to be the best, to host the best World Cup ever in Qatar 2022. And I think there is another video that we wanted to show you about the bounce back, how we had managed to fly people. It's a very emotional video. And as you know, sports is very emotional. So it's always good to link travel, and we've made use of our partner, how to inspire people, how to get them, emotionally back into the mood of traveling. And we helped our partners. So for example, the previous video that you have seen about AS Roma, Italy had closed their doors to tourists and people from around the world during the difficult time. And then beginning of June, they have decided to open their doors again. So we actually have helped the club in promoting Italy and Rome, their city, using their players and using our social media content on various social media channels to help them promote the destination, inspire people for the period following the COVID-19. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video.
You're taking a flight, your first in a while. A journey where nothing has changed, yet everything's changed. Perhaps it's your first flight back home to see that smile of all smiles. And how might it feel to watch the sunrise far from home once again? At Qatar Airways, we've continued to fly, taking so many people home safely. Changing, adapting, perfecting, making us the world's most experienced airline for passenger safety. With an airport advanced in hygiene and safety technology, maintaining our highest standards on every flight, and still flying to the most destinations around the world. So for your first flight into this new world, travel with an airline you can rely on. Ready? Let's go further together. Qatar Airways.
Thank you very much, Salam. Fascinating video and really interesting to hear your thoughts on Qatar 2022. If we now look at the European perspective, and I guess here we can bring in both Michael and Andy. We've got two different scenarios. Michael, you may be dealing as MasterCard with a scenario where sport returns, where fans return, and you can plan accordingly. Andy, you potentially could be advising those in Belgium or France that have actually seen their leagues cancelled. So what are the repercussions in each of those scenarios? To Michael, how is MasterCard and sponsorship different in Stadia without fans? And then after that, to Andy, give us your thoughts on how leagues like France and Belgium in football are going to recover after being cancelled, and again, what the permutations are from a sponsorship or brand perspective. Let's start though with Michael.
But I think with anything, you always need to start with the consumer and the fan. What is their experience, and what matters most to any business and brand? We care most about the fan and what that experience is. So over this time, technology was mentioned before. I think these new creative ideas and things that people are much more open to as far as how to experience their passions and what they love. We've talked about TV ratings. We've just talked about this general thirst and hunger for content and interactions. So I think if you watch the fan, how they're reacting and how they are engaging more in different ways, they're much more tuned to whether it's athletes that are creating content or the leagues. That's now going to shift clearly into live content. It's going to be different. We've seen it in the U.S. They've done it with golf, where they've had fans events without fans, but they've played actual golf. That sport probably benefits a little bit from the fact that the way they can cover it and the interactions and the, yes, you get roars and cheers and everything, but while players are hitting, it's a little bit different. So I think we're kind of seeing how fans adapt to that. We're seeing how the players are adapting and the content. One of the things that we say to any of our partners is, let's not just think about it as a negative. Let's not just talk about what's missing. Yes, fans are not there. That's a negative. That's missing. But are there positive things to look at? So now there's no ropes. Now there's no limitations of certain things that we've had to do. How can we innovate and try new things? So as we move into, there's different parts of the world that are coming online, obviously faster than others. As we look at football and what's going to be played in Europe, for us, our big partnership is with UEFA. So they've got their tournament scheduled at the end of August. I think we're going to go to Emanuel's house for dinner. So he's got a lot of folks coming over from Portugal that are going to be visiting there, and no fans probably as of now, but it looks like we're going to have some great football. We're going to have the tournament. We're going to be able to see what can be done from a production point of view. We're going to see what can be done from other forms of engagement. We're working hard to see, are there different ways that fans can maybe get different content, get different looks at things. But look, the bottom line is the things that do come back online, there's going to be a lot of excitement. There's going to be a lot of attention. And I think it's on the media, who I think are trying very hard. And when I mean that, I mean on the production side. How can it be produced? How can the physical setting look differently? Other sports I know are talking about, does it have to be played in the same environment? Does it have to be played in a full-scale environment with a big empty stadium, or can it be maybe cut down and played in a different place so you don't feel this big absence, this big void? So I think, look, every sport's going to play to their strengths. Every sport's trying to do what they can. I know there's been some great things in football where they've piped in sound and at least, I even like when I hear they've actually gone to the recordings of the actual match where it was played between those two teams. So you get, you get the sound that would be, relevant for those two teams playing. So look, there's lots of different things being tried. We want to be as supportive and helpful those can. We want to make sure that we work with our partners so that consumer and fan experience is exciting and is as great as possible, understanding that we all have to think a little bit differently.
So Andy, your thoughts on that, and particularly in relation, as I alluded to earlier, to those European countries that have seen their sports leagues cancelled?
Yeah, look, I mean, and to Michael's point, actually, I rather like listening to football without the manufactured crowd noise in the background. I like to hear what the players are yelling at each other and what the manager's shouting from the sidelines. It's quite exciting. Yeah, look, I clearly football and all sport has had a really big impact, and I guess the traditions of sponsorship was all about trading off the live product, and when there is no live product, the value proposition around sport does change somewhat. So it's great to see the Premier League back in this market. I think there's an enormous amount of hunger for people to see live sport again. But in the women's game in this market, and obviously other leagues around Europe with cancellations happening, it's up to those sports rights holders, those clubs, those leagues, to think long and hard about how they can continue to deliver value to their sponsors through digital platforms and through the data that they hold. And it's also important for them to work with those sponsors to say, when we are back in action, when next season's league does start again, how are we going to make good? How are we going to begin to build and develop the relationship that we've already established to make sure that you get the value out of this relationship that you ultimately wanted. But yeah, look, Europe's football fans are going to be missing a great deal of live product. And I think it's an opportunity, if anything, for those clubs to think, right, how do we sustain the relationship with our fans? As Michael said, the fans are at the heart of this. And so we have to worry about how to sustain and build the relationships with the fans for the long term. I don't think there's a magic bullet about how to solve the problem today when the leagues have been cancelled. I think it's just about looking forward, building tension and excitement for the new season, making sure that we're building the sponsor relationships into the heart of our planning. And I think when those leagues do come back, they'll be bigger and better than anybody can ever imagine. So I think there's a great opportunity coming at us in 2021, but we've clearly got to get there first, and we've got to call on the patience of all the football fans out there to wait for live product to return.
Dan, there may be no magic bullet. I would certainly agree with that, but there is and has been during COVID-19 digital. And for those clubs, leagues, federations that perhaps undersold the value of digital, we've had it reiterated, haven't we, over the last 3 months or so, how valuable digital can be. What kind of digital trends do you think we'll see post-COVID? Are leagues, clubs, federations going to lean more towards OTT and try and commercialize that through sponsors? And in addition, how difficult still do you think it is to accurately value your digital portfolio to a sponsor? Because we will have scenarios where certain football clubs, for example, don't want to rebate a sponsor. They would rather offer them added value through digital, but they have to be able to accurately put a pound or a dollar sign on that. So what are your overall thoughts on digital? How difficult is it to value, but how valuable is it to a sponsor?
I don't think it's difficult to value if you set up goals and objectives with the partners of what their expectations are and what you're tracking. And I think it goes back to what Michael said of ultimately, what are ways you're authentically connecting with fans? Clearly, everyone is quickly pivoting to accelerate, again, their digital and virtual offerings. And we're seeing everything from extreme revamping of content from physical events to, for example, we have in September coming up a 30-hour streamathon for a client. There's so much short form content being created, sometimes in-house. I think there's also more flexibility where properties are going out of house with speed to create content. I think ultimately the evaluations that are set up in terms of, number of people you reach and the typical metrics, earned media, they can still be applied to new digital platforms. And I think as much as things have changed, there's also a number of new platforms and opportunities where new digital content created in different ways. So for example, the NBA is going to be coming back with no fans, but never before in their history have they ever had that many players together in one location. So what they can do content-wise and digital and potentially create new value for sponsors. And it of course depends on what their rights are for their partners. Part of it's the consideration of what rights and benefits were already tied in digitally for certain sponsors, or for a sponsor that was more on the activation side, are they trying to quickly pivot and give them more digital assets? So I think you're going to see a lot more experimentation, which we've been seeing in different platforms. And then also, I think there's an openness now to be looking at whether it's the Overtime or TikToks, different digital platforms that properties can partner with, whether it's to just reach further distribution or specific target audiences. And I think I referenced earlier, but I think there's huge opportunities with women's sports right now in terms of opportunities for further awareness building, whether through traditional media properties. We're working on a new sports league called Athletes Unlimited, where the women professional players own 50% of the profits. ESPN and CBS have just announced major partnerships. So that may not have happened 12 months ago with the calendar in terms of content. So I think there's going to be continued a number of new platforms, and digital is going to be a huge part of that. And with everything, you have to be able to measure. But I think on the brand side, there's also more openness to the experimentation, that everything doesn't have to be defined in advance.
before we take some of your questions and move to the financial side, I want to put a question to Emanuel and also Courtney. Interested to get your thoughts on the sort of period we're in now and the next few months, with a lot of clubs, federations, those looking for sponsorship in sport, Emanuel, potentially desperate for added funds and injection. How can we protect against cut price deals or any form of sponsorship that may affect, if you like, the integrity of the deal? Because there will, with smaller sports clubs, leagues and federations, be an element of desperation, and they need to ensure, if they enter into financial deals and arrangements, that they benefit the brand and in no way diminish the brand by doing the deal, because they're so keen just to pull in anything at this time.
Well, I think, Ben, you have used some pretty strong words, but I think it's a clear portrait of the reality. Out there is great despair, because the hit has been so deep and so widespread that I would say 90% of the clubs across Europe and beyond are suffering tremendously this financial adversity. With the inability of having people in stadiums, it's not just top-level entertainment that is undermined, it's also the ability to generate income streams that are reinvested back into the system, including youth development of women's sport, and also the sustainability of their business model. Now, if you look, for example, to the European football market, you know that the latest audited figures show 28.9 billion euros, the equivalent to 25.5 billion pounds of direct revenue generated by the federations, the leagues, and the clubs, with a massive unbalance pending towards the big five leagues. Now, you only have top-level football, and not in every country, as France has decided, for example, to terminate their competition prematurely. Now, imagine the tsunami impact that this will have on the finances of the small and medium-sized clubs, the second division clubs. We are talking about more than 1,000 clubs across Europe. You have seen the FA announcing losses of 300 million pounds. You have seen UEFA also voicing figures on the same scale. So this is a very serious crisis, and there is no easy way out. Although I understand that the industry has an extraordinary ability to reinvent itself, to adjust, and it will prevail. And I think that with crisis comes also opportunities, and everything that Dan was saying a while ago is absolutely right. But in the meantime, what is clear is that sport and its representative organizations are more vulnerable than ever. And obviously, this raises concerns. And I do not want to cause alarm, but we all know what's happening. We all know the attractiveness that sport offers to organized crime, transnational, multinational, unscrupulous organizations and individuals. If there is any doubt, you can ask any law enforcement agency, and including the media. They will tell you how vulnerable and how things have evolved in a negative way over the past 3 months. All the reforms that were being implemented have stopped. We have not stopped, but other organizations who are on the ground moving things forward have been completely blocked. So this is truly a defining moment. And again, we can only turn the corner if we act as we preach, with the utmost integrity. And this is valid for the sport movement as well as the business community. For a long time ago, we have been listening to proclamations about the need to create a united front, where amongst the sponsors, we could have level playing field. So when they are competing in the market for a sponsorship opportunity, they are playing with the same rules and by the same anthem, with the same conditions as everybody else. Is this what we see? I question. What happened with the global brands that reacted so promptly 5 years ago and helped to oust Sepp Blatter out of the throne? Organizations like Sony, McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, Emirates, Nestle, Continental, and even from other sports. You have seen in your own country, Ben, England, you have seen a major scandal affecting rugby with the #1 club in the country, the Saracens, being dragged through the front pages and courts with an unprecedented scandal. What was the reaction from Allianz? They did not renew the sponsorship agreement. But you expected more, or didn't you? For a brand that invested so massively, it is important to lead by example. And this is why, knowing how serious this is and how difficult it is, I must commend the leadership that has been shown by the organizations, the brands that are here in this panel, MasterCard, Qatar Airways, those that are also members of the European Sponsorship Association, the agencies that have a leading role in influencing the clients into this new era where integrity is at the top. This is the moment for action rather than just proclamations. And this is why, again, I applaud their effort, I applaud their leadership, and I urge the whole community to take action and join this collective effort. The same way that I urge the fans to seize this opportunity, and the media. Don't just limit yourself to inform. Be the agents of change you want to see in the industry. This is what I ask you, this is what I expect, and this is what I trust will happen, and we are there also to support.
Thank you, Emanuel. You touched on some intriguing points, including the Allianz example, and we will move on to integrity in a moment, but I want to bring Courtney in here. Can you give us some insight into the ratings specifically? A sponsor will have access to them once the pilot phase is completed, certainly as I understand it. What kind of red flags on the integrity front might they see? And will they be in depth enough to help inform a sponsor as to whether they do or don't want to enter into a commercial agreement with a club or a federation or anybody included on that listing? Will they be a helpful point of call to sponsors to potentially dissuade them from sponsorship on integrity grounds, or confirm that their investment will come with integrity because of how the ratings are formulated?
Thank you, Ben. That's a really great question. I think that there's a few points that I'd like to raise on this topic is around the brand of organizations and sports organizations. Small, medium, large size sports organizations are looking for ways to differentiate themselves to achieve sponsorship. And especially in tight times like now, where financial strings are pulled a bit tighter, and sports organizations are looking for ways to differentiate themselves. I think the SERVS program is one of those ways where they could differentiate themselves and hold themselves to a higher level of integrity across the sector and the industry to prove that they do have the right governance practices in place, the right financial integrity practices in place, and govern their sports betting within their own organizations. And to me, integrity, trust, reliability, best practice is all associated with brand. And if you take it to any other sector just to portray it, investors now are actually looking at sustainability or integrity of organizations when they are making investment decisions. That will translate into the sports industry now, where they're looking for more integrity stamps or symbols from organizations to be able to qualify at an initial discussion, or even in an in-depth discussion, as you've indicated, Ben, whether or not they should embark on investing in that sports organization or sponsoring that sports organization. So I think the brand that a small sports organization or a large sports organization would want to have has to be associated with integrity in this climate in order to differentiate themselves to win new sponsorships. The other thing I would just say is that around the rating system itself is I hope and I encourage, along with Emanuel, that there will be a certain threshold of investment that will become the norm in sponsorships in the sports industry, where it may correlate with the amount of money given the rating that an organization achieves and serves. So for example, if you were to break this down, that sponsorship organization would only invest at £500,000 if they achieved a bronze status, or that it's $1 million if they achieve a silver status, or if it's one, and you can keep setting those tiers. But eventually the idea that sponsorships will actually look for an organization to have achieved SERV's rating and will actually adjust their financial investment according to what caliber of rating they achieve. So gold, again, being that rating that shows there is no deeper dive to be made, because we as BSI are going to check on behalf of the sports organizations for you the level of integrity on an ongoing basis. So the other point I'll just make is that when we assess or audit an organization for the SERV's rating, it's not a one point in time and stop. It is very much a continuous assessment cycle that we will engage in. So if they achieve gold in 2020, we will assess them again in 2021 and 2022 to ensure they are maintaining that gold standard. So from here on out, my thought process, and I think the SIGA vision, is that sports organizations will achieve sponsorship at a different way now, because they will be able to show that they are an integrity-driven business.
Just before we move on to integrity as a topic and look at the future of sponsorship as well in the post-COVID era, a quick question to Michael and also Salam on the sort of logistics of sponsorship. Michael, first of all, famously now, Wimbledon has been paying pandemic insurance for upwards of 2 decades, and they'll benefit from that. What about from MasterCard's perspective? Did you ever have a sort of pandemic clause or any form of insurance to recoup potential losses or value that isn't materialized? And if not, how might sponsorship contracts change in light of COVID-19?
I think all of the contracts to a degree basically contemplate lack of performance, right? It's a performance-driven situation where they're, as I usually joke, the clauses that the brand has to do in a contract are usually pretty limited, right? Don't break the rules and write the check. The contract has a lot of pages and a lot of stuff in there that the sales people have said, hey, these are all the things we're going to deliver. It's going to be great. We're going to have all this value and all that sort of thing. So the contracts are generally designed to protect and make sure that they, whoever the partner is, delivers on basically the promises and the product that they've sold. So if you manage it properly and you contemplate the right things, and thankfully we have a great partner at our agency and internally with our lawyers, is to basically say, well, what if doesn't happen? How does it work? We all know about force majeures and all these fun things that we're having to study every day. But I would just say the basic part from a brand point of view is protecting against non-performance for whatever reason. It could be an athlete that gets hurt. It could be, obviously a sport that doesn't play. We're clearly in some very, unique times that have not necessarily been specifically contemplated. But I would say for the most part, anybody that either has a contract that contemplates it or has a partnership that says, we get it, we understand that you're not getting the value that we said you would, and we want to be a long-term partner, and we want to do the right thing, and we want to be known as an organization or a group that doesn't just take the money for nothing, because that's not going to last very long. It's a very short-sighted view, and I would say none of them have, in my experience, have thought of it that way. Everyone's thinking about it just from a, you may not have a clear certainty at this moment, but also they don't have clear certainty about what they can return. You have partners that if they're still not playing, their answer is, listen, once we can play again, or once we can have our events again, we're happy to sit there and say, we'll wonder what conditions can we play, what make goods can we do, and what we're trying to do internally, and I'm sure Salam's doing the same thing, is what's important to us. I don't want generic sort of here's a kind of an answer for everybody, whatever you want. Each of our brands, if you look at any event, you see all those brands, we all have a different business model, different things of value to us. Well, we're sitting there saying, look, these are things of value to us. These are things that are going to be important. So as you do come out of it, And look, in our particular space, a lot of things that maybe we're not necessarily known for that are continuing to still perform in our business have to do with cybersecurity, data protection. There's a lot of talk about this future of different medical information that may be conveniently, shared among people so that you could know maybe people's medical history so that it potentially makes, it easier for people to come back together. Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you people aren't just going to be walking around sharing their medical information and just want you to know their history. There's so many things that we still don't know about what anybody has been through that we can't have any negatives go with that. So there are things within data protection, personal privacy, things that really maybe aren't necessarily talked about as much now, but I would say pre-COVID were becoming very, very big hot buttons. If you go back, you don't have to go back that far to realize personal privacy and information about me, people are getting more nervous about it and wanting to protect more. And that's a big part of what we do. So I think as we move forward, that might be things you may see us talk about more that historically we haven't. So are there ways that we can talk about through these sports as they come back? Kind of one example for us, I'm sure other businesses have their examples, but the bottom line is things have changed. I think we've created poor choice of words. An environment has happened and been created where people have to think differently. And we have to be more open to conversations that says, okay, I understand this is how you used to like it. You used to want to deliver, this and want to get paid this way. And maybe that worked for us, but things have been so different. Like I said, I'd like to think there's a lot of positives with that. Fans are going to be wanting to engage differently. So maybe if there's a way, look, I still think there's a day athletes are going to understand and embrace this environment and realize maybe they don't want to do a meet and greet and physically engage with someone or travel, but they're more open to having a situation like this where they have more personal interaction. You can share it more globally. Instead of it's just me and whoever's with me, you can bring family or friends or other people and kind of connect people in ways that have not been connected before. So I think a lot of people are doing a lot of smart thinking. I think it's just a matter of trying to understand where the losses have been, how businesses need to recoup, and how we can think differently.
Salam, I want to bring you in as an extension of what we've just heard. Avi has asked via YouTube, and please do get your questions in using the chat, what your thoughts are on KPI-driven sponsorship. Of course, any sponsorship deal will have KPIs beforehand, and they will often be reviewed ongoingly and afterwards. But post-COVID, is there a logic that you'll have to almost embrace tiered sponsorship where based upon the success of the KPIs, you can increase the amount of sponsorship, but if you fail to meet them, it might be reduced? Is there a logic now that sponsors might entertain deals with certain clubs or federations based on that sliding financial scale rather than just setting the KPIs beforehand and then reviewing them afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't agree with you more. I mean, clearly the COVID-19, something nobody have anticipated ever, was like a game changer. All of a sudden you wake up in the morning and there are no more games and nobody is playing. So how do you justify your sponsorship? Do you put it on hold? Do you stop paying them? Do you send the contract to the lawyers to review what you're going to do? However, when you have really a very solid relationship, and I always say this, that for me, I don't call it a sponsorship, I call it partnership, because it is supposed to be a win-win situation for the brand, for the organization, and for the club. We have something joined together, the passion of sports, but we're also investing some money for branding and for, to build some values, and it has to be justified. So there has to be some ethical judgment of how much you're paying. Is it worth it? Is it KPI? And I totally agree with this approach that, putting in tiers, gold, platinum, silver, whatever it is, and you kind of tick the boxes, whether you're getting value for money, it is very important. But in particular for the COVID-19, I'd like to say that the Qatar Airways experience has been fantastic because we have managed to make use of the sponsorship, even though that the life had seemed to be slowed down and people on lockdown, but we still brought a life to the sponsorship through all the social media activations that we had come up creatively with creative thinking, that okay, I mean, the players can't play, they're not on the pitch. However, we brought Neymar and he did a whole series of interesting videos. What do you do? What's your favorite? How do you stay safe? How to inspire you to traveling? And I'd like to thank Dan for bringing the NBA. Now they're going back to play. So for example, we've introduced something called live Instagram session where we bring a player. So we're bringing one of the Brooklyn Net to talk about how life is going back to normal in New York. And also Qatar Airways had, resumed the flights to New York. So it makes a synergy and perfect sense to get somebody from the Nets to talk about life in New York and the resumption of the flights of Qatar Airways. But there's always a link and synergy. And I think it all depends on the creative thinking and the problem solving in any situation. Nobody have anticipated the pandemic would put all, the football matches on hold, yet we have managed to make use of our partnership and work together and bring some really good values to the sport, to the games, and to the whole world suffering through, bringing the players to do fundraising for the club or, paying back the doctors. So, but I agree with you that we need to think about our KPI moving forward and to put them in tiers. I hope I answered your question.
Very much so, and thank you for that and the level of detail. I want to just move us on to integrity because Emanuel had mentioned aspects of that. And here I'd like to bring in the whole panel, but starting please with Andy and Dan. When do you think is the right time for a sponsor or brand to get on board with an integrity-based movement or protest? So Black Lives Matter is a good example in the Premier League, for example. And we see a complete split, really, in my view, across the sponsorship landscape. Some sponsors embrace a movement, some show empathy and solidarity, some outwardly protest if applicable, and some completely shy away and make no comment. What are your thoughts from the perspective of either a sponsor or a brand? Let's start with Andy.
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think, traditionally sponsors have been, I would say, nervous about taking a strong stand on big political or governance or, higher order issues outside of the environment that they operate in. I would say, though, that during this period, the COVID period and around Black Lives Matter and a range of other issues, the brands have become much more confident to take a position on those issues. I think brands, in the most part, will think carefully about how their position on those issues reflects their overall brand purpose and their overall brand value. But I think customers expect now brands to have a strong perspective on some of these big global issues. I look at my children, for example, so the Gen Zers and the Gen Xers, the younger guys and girls in the world, and I see a community that has a very, very strong and passionate point of view about these big issues. And I think they have an expectation that the sports and the teams that they have passion for will take a strong stance on those issues. And I think they also will therefore expect that the brands and sponsors that are also fans of the teams that they love will take a similar position on those issues. So I think the perspective of those brands and the rights holders should reflect the broader values of the organization. But look, I think we've seen a lot of it, haven't we, around COVID? We've seen a lot of it around Black Lives Matter, that brands have decided to take a stance, to put a stake in the sand and say, no, this is our point of view and we stand by it. So, I think that's something that's gathering momentum all the time, is my view.
What are your thoughts, Dan?
Just to add to that, building off what Andy said, I think consumers, I myself as a consumer, consumers and fans expect brands to have a point of view and an opinion on these things. They want to hear where they stand. And I think the brands that are scrambling are the ones that maybe didn't have as their core values some of the integrity and cultural and values built within the DNA of the company. But you have brands that, with their sponsorships, for example, or with their messaging overall, with their impact in communities, that's been part of their DNA and that's been part of the consideration. So I don't want to speak for Michael at MasterCard, but I've had the privilege of meeting Ajay, the leadership of MasterCard. And I can say that, like, when there's integrity at the leadership of organizations, and I'm biased with our chairman, Sir or Lord Sebastian Coe, you think long-term and not short-term. And brands are going to make mistakes. There's heightened sensitivity and there's heightened feedback related to what brands are going to do. I think the importance is being authentic, not doing one-offs or trying to be too reactive, because fans and consumers will see right through if it's reactive. And I think some of the television advertisements that have come up where they've seemed like they're hitting a social message, but then trying to sell the product, I think are falling really short. So it's, and I think there's opportunities now, and more so a trend we saw tremendously before COVID crisis and before the civil rights issues that are happening, was more brands were wanting social impact and purpose as part of their sponsorships. And I think that's going to continue to accelerate, which is a great thing for the properties and for the brands, that's already an important consideration for them. I think they're going to thrive even more in that environment.
Yeah, sorry, Ben, just to add, if you look at the winner of the entertainment line for sports, so the Cannes Lions, the greatest celebration of creativity in sports marketing last year, was won by the Nike Colin Kaepernick campaign, which got a lot of heat at the time, but absolutely was embedded in what the values of that Nike brand were all about. And it got a lot of heat, but it sold a ton more product. It got people burning trainers, yes, but it sold a ton more product. And now look, from the response to the Black Lives Matter issue, how Nike's credibility has probably grown substantially as a result of that really creative activation, that really creative campaigning around a cause that they have right at the heart of their DNA. So I think lots and lots of brands are probably looking at that kind of work and saying, we need to champion the causes that are important to us as an organization.
And just to add to this notion of a protest or empathy with a movement, Salam, let me put something topical to you. Most people will have read in the press the allegations of piracy, and specifically against a network named Be Out Q, which is a play on beIN Sports, the official rights holder for various European rights. And leagues and clubs and federations have come out and condemned piracy. And there's been a recent report from the WTO as well, which has revealed various findings. As a sponsor with ties and ins within some of these sports leagues, it will impact you as Qatar Airways as well. Is something like that the right kind of issue, and it has happened during COVID-19, for Qatar Airways to speak out on? And if you have done that, what kind of stance have you taken, and how strong can you be?
Yeah, it was really, as you know, everything in our region turns from sports into political issues. So we usually don't comment on political issues, but from purely a trade perspective, this was intellectual property issue. And in Qatar, we always take the higher moral ground. So we don't actually get into dialogues or, comment on such things. But we know that beIN Sport has the right to broadcast all these matches, and what happened in Saudi was really something wrong, and we're glad with the international organization. But to your point, yes, we don't interfere into political matters, but this is an issue that, of course, intellectual property has to be really protected, especially in the football business, where some of the agencies or organization and TV broadcast, they invest a huge, so their rights as well have to be protected because they have made a huge investment, and there should be some ethics. What is really a key word here is ethical behavior and ethics. And this is where we look at SIGA and organizations like you guys to bring in the ethical values to the picture and to have some governance in place and to ensure that nobody overstep anybody else and everybody's rights are protected.
So then, Emanuel and Courtney, what would be your take on piracy, and more specifically relating to that, the potential takeover that's happened during COVID-19 of Newcastle United by the Saudi Public Investment Fund? How can an organization like SIGA or your verification system play a part in informing people and ensuring that if that takeover goes through, and if that Saudi government entity was to acquire a club like Newcastle United, it is done with integrity?
Thank you for the question. Another pertinent one. And I will not hide from the sensitiveness of the issues that you brought to the table, because these matters need to be addressed properly, and action must be taken, and coherence must prevail. Either we consider that it's a free-for-all approach and everyone can cannibalize income sources and income streams with devastating adverse impact to those who legitimately invest their money, their reputation, and play by the rules, or we need to take action. We cannot turn a blind eye. Because when we are confronted with digital piracy or counterfeiting goods or any other breach of the law, you are affecting the rule of law. You are affecting one of the cornerstones upon which democratic systems are based, which is respect for the law and private property, without which no business can exist and no sector can be viable. So digital piracy affects deeply the sustainability of sports organizations, of leagues, of federations, of Olympic committees, of clubs, and everyone who is engaged in the industry. And without the ability to ensure proper protection for intellectual property rights, the industry will collapse. All the investments will be driven away because governments, and here I raise my hand to the governments, because governments must enforce the law. Governments should not be led by convenience. This is an imperative, because without sustainability, obviously, we have a clear integrity issue, and that will open a Pandora's box, which will transform sport into something else, but no longer on a dynamo of social, cultural, economic, educational development. So this is a priority. And because this is a priority, and we prefer action rather than words, we have united a number of key stakeholders in a collective initiative to design an independent white paper on sport integrity. A white paper on sport integrity that will dissect all the challenges facing the industry, and protection of IP rights is one of many. Then we will discuss how this affects the industry, what are the solutions, what are the best practices. We will promote a serious and widespread, ample discussion on this, and then we will force the change where it is needed. Because at the end of the day, if we continue to navel gaze and turn a blind eye, we will end up all blind. All blind. And this is why we want to also to express the confidence and optimism that women in business, we are here to stay, we are not alone, we galvanize a great level of legitimacy and representativeness within the industry, and the same way that I used to do when I was leading the European leagues 20, 15, 5 years ago, and the World League Association, fighting to preserve our intellectual property rights, I will do it again with SIGA. And again, we want to take this forward in a very serious way and with results. This is why we will announce soon the expert groups that will compose the 6 core areas of the white paper on sport integrity. And you will see the leaders who are here in this discussion actively engaged. You will also see, because it's already public, that UEFA will be also one of the main partners of this initiative, as well as the US government, the Intellectual World Property Rights Organization, and all those who understand that without the ability to generate income streams, the sustainability of sport is in danger, and that will have a colossal negative effect in other fronts. It is also vital for the media, for the broadcasters who legitimately invest their money. This is not about politics. I don't care about politics. This is about whether we take action or we turn a blind eye, whether we continue to proclaim the sex of angels or we make it happen. And now it's the moment of truth. And I'm glad that we are having this discussion because we will take it forward in the US, in the Middle East, in Asia, in every continent, in a very independent way. And we count on governments also to undertake their indeclinable share of responsibility. And I'm looking them in their eyes because they know what I mean. And the same goes to the European Commission, who must take the lead and must show results in this front.
Emanuel, thank you. Courtney, anything to add on this topic?
Just that when I first read when this story broke, the first thing I did was have a little chuckle to myself because this exact issue was incorporated into the financial integrity standard. There's actually a section of that standard that talks about sustainability of a business and the finance, and it touches on IP and the ownership and onerous requirement of sports organizations to protect and maintain IP. So it very much is an integral part of the standards and the SERVS rating. So I think the thing I'll just say in commentary around it is that the standards are very comprehensive and hopefully will cover for any eventuality or scandal that may exist in this. So therefore can prevent the scandals from happening if organizations truly embed the principles of the universal standards that SIGA has created, like Dan mentioned, around if it's in the DNA of the organization, if it's part of the culture, then scandals like this hopefully will be prevented moving forward. And again, and it does cover this as it relates to IP.
Michael, integrity can play out in the public domain, but it can also be a very private internal conversation between a sponsor and a federation or brand. And as a sponsor like MasterCard, you have to make a judgment call, don't you, as to whether you stick with a federation or you walk away based on your own internal sense of integrity. And of course, historically, this happened to MasterCard with FIFA over, I believe, an issue with Visa coming into that particular organization, one of your rivals. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into what happened, how integrity came into play, and why you as a sponsor chose to walk away?
It was a little bit before my time, so but I do know the story, and I think the key thing is it really is about an organization and what an organization stands for. And I think, look, at the time, a lot of different people involved. So I certainly, don't want to point fingers at that story, but I would say, things weren't done properly. They weren't done by the contract. They, this one did actually go to court. It was, this was not arbitrated in public opinion. It was ruled by formality of contract law and that sort of thing. So it was arbitrated, I'd say, about as properly as possible. And I think the key for us was the decision as a company that's saying, look, even though we technically, sort of won and could be in a situation to continue, it was just a decision at the time that says, let's part ways and move on. And I think that's a little bit different than I'd say what's going on today. And I think what I would focus on from a today point of view and how I even think of these stories, look, a lot of things that are in the public have to do with, when we start talking about scandal and really you start talking about things that are illegal and against, sort of the general rule of law that's accepted around the world. I don't care where you are. But for one of the things we look at, and I think what SERVS is going to do in so much of these conversations, there's lots of things that have to do with whether it's financial integrity or all these things that aren't necessarily rooted in bad behavior from a I'm going to show up at work today and do something bad. There's a lot of people that show up at work that try to do the right thing and they think they're playing within what they know, but we just don't know. And look, we get audited internally all the time at our company. And I'm always amazed thinking, look, I have a wonderful team and we're wonderful people and we're trying to do the right thing. And you get back to your reports like, oh, you guys didn't think of this, this, and this. It's like, oh, So it wasn't that we overtly went and did something bad and tried to skate by. It's just like, hey, there's checks and balances. Maybe, you know, the way you measured this, or the way you kind of looked at certain things, you know, there's best practices to be learned here. And there's things that, you know, from a training point of view, from just an organizational point of view, things that can be done better. I mean, that's why the whole audit community exists. So I think what I would say when I think of our partners and the folks that we look at externally, and why a system like this is, and actually really one of the things I've always been saying too, this is where brands can help. And I think any, you know, brands, and especially when you're publicly traded, right, you're under intense scrutiny. You have audit committees at the board level. You know, we could go on and on about all the stories about how businesses have had to, look, we have public money. We serve in partnership with governments. We serve, all sorts of responsibilities when we essentially have capital. I mean, we use these sort of words as out of textbooks, but when you have someone's capital, you've got someone's money, and you're expected to use it in a proper way and how you invest it. So I would say that historically, brands and businesses have had to have these practices. That's why we have internal audit. We have external boards that are independent. And what I say when I talk to other partners that come from this world of elected officials and, you know, people around the world kind of partner up and say, well, if you elect me, we'll help you out here. And even that could be done properly, right? It could be people saying, look, I in my continent believe your continent needs more investment, and it's the right thing. So again, I don't think all of these things are always rooted in necessarily bad behavior, but are you transparent, right? That's a big thing. You know, would whatever decision you're making, whatever relationship you're creating, does that stand up to public scrutiny? Would you put that out into the ethos and into the ether and say, hey, this is what we're doing and why? If you disagree with it, I'm happy to have the conversation, but we're trying to do the right thing. And I again, that's why an independent third body, which, you know, we probably can't say enough, an independent third body coming in and saying, okay, here's best practices. Here's how, you know, the corporate world works. Here's what government taxes. I mean, all these organizations exist for reasons. We may not always like them and like what they do, but they exist for reasons. And the part I'll end with, and sort of my plug for SIGA, when people always ask, well, why are you and why are MasterCard involved and supportive? One of my original things that I saw about how Emanuel and the team constructed this is that government, sport, and business coming together equally. We have a responsibility on the business side. Yes, we're spending our money. Yes, we believe we speak for the fan and the consumer, but we're also not the police. You know, we're not law enforcement. We can't be expected to subpoena and do all sorts of things. That's what governments are do. We can follow what investigations are done, and we can make judgments and say, hold on, we found this problem here, and that's not something we can support, so we can make a judgment from there. But we can't be expected to go right from you know, a newspaper article that says something bad happened, all of a sudden we have to make a judgment. It's a very uncomfortable position for a brand to be in, because what if the report is wrong? We've never seen that before, right? What if the report is wrong? What if there's other reasons? So it takes a system in place that says there needs to be training for the properties, there needs to be communications, there needs to be level set. Say, this is the expectations that we as a sponsor have. We expect you to act accordingly in these areas. And that crosses over into whether it's financial transparency, hiring practices. I mean, that goes down that whole situation we are today. Are you an organization that is open and inclusive? I mean, inclusive is the word we use at MasterCard all the time, and it can be a very broadly used word. How inclusive are you? And then, of course, sustainability. Are you thinking about your business? Again, I don't think anybody shows up at work and says, I'm going to do something bad for the environment today. But did you think through saying, hold on, we've created this new program and we're excited to expand over here. What are the negative potential impacts of that? So all of these things take conversations like this. They take an awareness, they take an openness to say, I think we could do better. I think we could learn better. And I think we could partner better to solve all of these things, because these are not small things, but they're going to take time and effort and people like us coming together.
Absolutely. And I think that's certainly the best points, because you've summed up a number of issues nicely to stop the long part of the discussion, if you like. And I'll therefore start to wrap things up by getting our panelists to make a few closing remarks and chuck in a question or two as well from you via the YouTube chat. And we'll try and wrap everything up within about 5 minutes. So we're into what I like to call the sort of speed round from the panelists' perspectives. If you can keep your answers to 30 to 45 seconds, then we'll get everybody away in injury time within our allocated 90 minutes, if you like. So I'm going to start first by just throwing a question to anyone on the panel who feels comfortable answering it. And this comes from Matthew Alvarado, who works for SportsCred. And he says, I'd like to hear what the panelists think specifically on the boycott of Facebook and how that may open doors for more influencer marketing with athletes and rights holders instead of ad buy.
I'll make one quick comment. I think it speaks to what we were talking about earlier, that maybe in ways that hasn't been as dramatic in the past, of brands stepping up and leveraging their ad buys, their marketing, their sponsorships in ways that reflects their values, and maybe uncomfortable, but they're putting themselves out there. I think, whether it's the Unilevers of the world, some of the groups that Coca-Cola that are on that list, I think we're going to continue to see those things happening where people are utilizing their resources and their partnerships in ways that align back to their values. So I think from the standpoint of that happening is a good thing, from a standpoint of looking at from your own, again, organizations, what's right for you and authentic, and then staying with that hopefully long term, in terms of then your customers are going to appreciate that you had a point of view. Not everybody's going to agree with it, but it goes back to values.
Salam, a question for you on sports washing, which is prevalent in a number of places. It's a term we almost use, I think, a bit too flippantly at times. Do you like the term? Is it called something more positive internally within sponsors? Because ultimately, you as Qatar Airways are not per se sports washing. That has derogatory connotations, but what you are doing is using your brand within sport to promote Qatar, to promote the World Cup, to promote travel, to promote tourism. None of these things are necessarily bad things, are they? So do you think sports washing, for want of a better word, can go hand in hand with integrity? And if so, do you call it something different internally because publicly that particular term perhaps does have unfairly negative connotations at times?
Yeah, I think as an industry, I agree with you. I mean, we definitely use all our sponsorship to promote travel and the World Cup, and we make every opportunity in a good sense. We're hosting the World Cup, so have been a lot of preparations. The stadiums, our integrity, we make a lot of effort, for the sports, because if we don't believe in sports, we haven't gone all of this. I mean, Qatar sports is a universal language, and we all try to promote the game, and definitely we want it on a moral ground, on very high ethical grounds, and maybe it is not the best term, but I agree with you. It is. It just gives a reflection of what it is that we want governors. We want really very transparent, process. We want people to be very transparent about everything that they do regarding sports. We want clean games, clean sponsorship. So the term actually expresses what it is. And we highly believe in the role that SIGA is going to play, and with the grading system and everything else, that we would help to bring all the sponsorship into a new era, which is totally clean.
Andy, just finally, before I bring in Courtney and Emanuel, just to wrap things up, what do you think sport is going to look like in this post-COVID era? What might be some of the positive ramifications of the last 3 months from a sponsorship point of view? Because you could argue, for example, that in the absence of fans, sponsors have been able to access bigger TV audiences. You could also argue that we've moved in Europe into a slightly more American model because we're having drinks breaks in games and things are moving at a slower pace. And that might actually, in the long run, allow sponsors more windows in which to advertise. Everyone's sort of talking about it from the point of view of the players and the coaches. They can have sort of timeouts and they can make more substitutions in football. But each of these things slows down the game enough potentially to have more ad breaks, to sell more sponsorship and so on. So do you see anything lasting in sport across Europe from the last few months that might benefit sponsors and be here to stay?
Oh, blimey, look, I think ultimately, I think sport in a year's time will be pretty much exactly like it was 6 months ago. You know, the essence of sport is that the fans have a deep passion for the team they back. They care deeply about the outcome and the fortunes. And I hope they engage actively and proactively with the sponsors that behave like they are a fan and passionately want to add value to the fans' experiences. So I think ultimately the product that we see across all sports will be the same as it was before. What will change, I think, during this period, the rights holder community, the sports organisations have thought very, very hard about their digital product. About the content strategy they have. They've thought very, very hard about the first party data they hold for their fans, because that's going to become a critical metric in the discussions that they have with their sponsors. And I know, for example, at CSM, with CSM Engage, for example, one of our ESSA members, you know, they have a very, very active strategy around building knowledge and understanding of data. So I think this period will have really, really flexed the rights holders' muscles around their approach to digital and data and esports and all of that stuff, which has really bubbled to the surface over the last 3 months. But ultimately, the heart of the product in live sport will return. But I hope it will return bigger and better and more robustly than it ever had been, because it will be underpinned by a really, really amazing knowledge of their well, not knowledge, but an activation of their digital community. So yeah, look, I'm looking forward to sport returning like it was, and I hope the drinks break. I'm sure the drinks breaks won't survive, and that we'll retain the product that we've all known and loved for the last 100 years.
Thank you very much indeed, Courtney. Let's bring you in just to move back to SIGA specifically, and again, the system that we started by talking about. We've used the word pilot a lot. How far off are we from pilot becoming practical, and where can people learn more in order to sort of follow that journey, so when it's done, they'll know how they can access it, where they can access it, and when they can access it?
Thank you, Ben. I think just the closing statements that I will make is that the pilot is ready. We have translated the audit scheme and the audit way of delivering to be allowed to deliver remotely as well as in person. So we have both deployment mechanisms given the current scenario that we're in right now. So we have a couple interested parties, I would say, to engage with the initial pilot, and we're pursuing those opportunities. So I'd highly encourage any other participants who would like to be pioneering integrity. Think about the press release for your brands that could come of pioneering good governance and integrity as the sports organization for the first to undergo and receive a rating to the SERVS program. And I think the only other point that I'd raise is where to achieve that. There was a SIGA newsletter that went out recently that had a lot of information about how to engage in the pilot and also how the ratings work. And also there's a lot of information on SIGA's website about that. So highly encourage, and hopefully BSI will meet you soon as a part of the assessment process.
Courtney, thank you. And Emanuel, just wrap things up for us. Your thoughts, obviously, on today's discussion. This also brings us to a conclusion of the inaugural SIGA-Soccerex series, and all of those discussion panels over the last few weeks can be found on our YouTube page as well. But wrap things up, and I mean, I guess I have to put you on the spot as well and ask you to at least show us the sombrero that I saw off air, just so Dan is not the only person to go through an entire panel in a hat, and so we can end on a positive and with a smile as well. But please just bring this fascinating panel to a close first.
Well, I always deliver what I promise. So here's the sombrero. I will save it to the grand finale. But what I wanted to say is the result of a deep, serious reflection that I have been doing since I first joined sport, football in particular. I am a lawyer by trade. I have been performing many roles, and I have come to 27 years. 27 years is not 27 weeks or 27 months. It's 27 years at the forefront of the industry. Always leading, always rowing against the tide, always believing that the sports leaders of today could live up to the expectations and the challenges that are brought into our doorstep, into our homes, into our lives. And this is one defining moment in history. And the way we choose to respond to this challenge will determine not only how our families will look to ourselves, but how future generations will regard us and judge us. Make no mistake about it. There is a lot at stake. And so, Ben, allow me to speak to those who are watching us, those who are listening us, those who have followed, the thousands of people that have followed us throughout this webinar series, to ask simple questions. And simple questions require simple answers. Do you believe that it's time for sport to be governed and operate with the highest integrity standards? Do you believe that it's time to have proper, effective gender equity, diversity, and inclusion in the boardroom? Do you believe when we mention sport for all, we say no to racism and we make this happen? Do you believe that it's time to have financial integrity and transparency on club ownership, on players' transfers and related transactions, not to mention the activities and the credentials of the agents involved? Do you believe that it's time to have level playing field on the business side of things, where it is related with the attribution of major sports events or major broadcasting deals or sponsorship deals? Do you believe that it's time to have a united, collective, concerted front so that we can have the highest standards also in terms of youth development? Do you believe, ladies and gentlemen, that it's time that we walk the talk, that we make the change, that we can do this without protesting in the streets or with violence? Do you believe that the sports movement is mature enough to understand the challenges that we are facing? And what are you prepared to do about it? Because if you turn your face, if you just ignore or remain indifferent, nothing will change. If you believe that this is the right moment, take action and join us. Like MasterCard, like Qatar Airways, like CSM, like European Sponsorship Association, like all our members are doing. Participating in a collective initiative, independent, neutral, guided only by the assumption of responsibility and the ambition to walk the talk and make the change. So these are the questions, and clear questions require clear action. It is time for action. This is not against anyone. It's in favor of sport, a sport that can only fuel entertainment, excitement, self-confidence, self-esteem, if it is delivered with integrity, if it is clean. Otherwise, it is not sport, it's a shame. This is what I wanted to say, looking yourselves into the eyes and trusting that you will also give a step forward and take co-ownership of the movement, the global movement that SIGA represents and stands for. It is not easy. I can assure you that. You can ask anyone who is involved in SIGA. You can ask our families, the dedication, the sacrifice, the hurdles, the obstacles, but we will not cease until this is done, because it happens on our watch, and we will not let to future generations what belongs to us and is our responsibility. And I'll say this in a very positive and constructive tone, not with the intention of naming and shaming, not with the intention of pointing the fingers against anyone, but with the intention of naming and faming, not naming and shaming, with the intention to turn on the volume if needed, but above all, roll up the sleeves to take action. And it is with this in mind that I would like to take this opportunity to announce that we will this Friday continue to discuss with the global sponsorship movement and with ESA and then in particular, how we can make this forward, how we can galvanize the support of other organizations so that we can have truly a global movement and spur the change we want to see in the world of sport. Tomorrow, we will mobilize and meet with 16 leading universities around the world so that we can also bring civil society to the heart of these reforms and can have also the new generations engaged and properly equipped to deal with the challenges. And we will have, finally, in September, between the 7th and the 11th, the first ever Sport Integrity Week, the first of many, which will see further discussions and hopefully further action in this field. So to all those that have been doing this heavy lifting, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Michael, to Dan, to Salam, to Courtney, to Andy, who have trusted on SIGA since the first time I knocked at their doors. They did not hesitate. They did not have doubts. They said, we are in and we want to be part of this change. I want to say also thanks to you, Ben, as I want to say thanks to David Eads from BBC and
Davis from CNN.
Yes, from CNN. I want to say because the press has been a tremendous ally in this cause and moving things forward. So we want to also to pay tribute to all of them. And Amanda has been also not only a very professional journalist as she is, but also a female leader. And female leadership is what we want to see in sport as in business. And Salam is also one of them. So to our members, to our committed supporters, to our partners, including SIGA-Soccerex and Inside World Football, to the hundreds and thousands of anonymous people who have expressed their voice and rendered their contribution and their encouragement, we owe also a heartfelt word of appreciation. To the speakers, it goes without saying, we have had stunning lineups and they have made a difference. I think that we are all united, working as a team, because in sport as in life, without a team, you cannot win. And that leads me to thank Katie, Ian, Shelley, Nicholas, Elda, Nadisha, Larry, and there's so many other people who have made this possible. This is not the end of the journey. This is just the beginning. Women in business, we are here to stay, and we count on you. So thank you in advance.
Great stuff, Emanuel. Thank you very much indeed. And for that sombrero cameo as well. Certainly put a smile on my face. I think he's actually going to grab it and put it on now as well. So we can end with beaming smiles. Funnily enough, everyone really should have had one of them. And it's a shame that
I do have the moustache.
Exactly. Maybe for the next one as well, we'll each have to wear a hat. But listen, many thanks to Emanuel, to SIGA, to Soccerex, to all the partners involved in this, and of course to our panelists today. That concludes the forum and also our inaugural SIGA-Soccerex series. You can watch all of the discussions, as I alluded to earlier, on our YouTube page. So thanks again to our panel and to you for all of your questions. And as Emanuel alluded to, we'll be back in September for the first ever SIGA Sport Integrity Week. That's going to be a digital conference and networking event, which runs between the 7th and the 11th of September. So please do stay tuned for the full program soon. But for now, from all of our panelists and myself, Ben Jacobs, thank you very much for tuning in and goodbye.
Goodbye.